David, Dayen is the author of Monopolized, Life in an Age of Corporate Power and Chain title. He writes regularly for The Intercept and The Nation and was recently appointed editor for the American Prospect. So he'll talk about what he sees going on that we see clearly in the healthcare industry, but it's everywhere. And thank you so much, David, and thanks to Cheryl Stevenson for helping us find David. David.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I am Dave Dayen, the executive editor of the American Prospect, where over the last several months, we have engaged in a series called The Business of Healthcare. And you can find that. It's pretty simple to find. It's at prospect.org/business of healthcare, and I'll put the link in the chat. I am supportive of a single payer system as a system that has proven to work in virtually every country in the industrialized world where it's been attempted. There are varying degrees of single payer systems. There are hybrid approaches. There are approaches that are even deeper, like in England, which has socialized medicine. But in general, it is found that in this particular market, the healthcare market, having leverage on one side of the transaction with a government approach rather than a for-profit approach is certainly preferable from the standpoint of patients, and actually also from the standpoint of funding. As we know, the administrative costs are much lower. National health expenditures in the United States are higher than virtually any country in the world, and outcomes are lower in terms of longevity, in terms of other health outcomes. So I admire the work of folks like yourselves who are trying to bring forth a universal healthcare system in the United States. What I, in this section called the Business of Healthcare, and what members of my staff have been arguing, is that under the current system that we have, it's hard to imagine a Medicare for all in today's America as anything other than a way for corporate America to siphon off dollars. And in order to truly bring forth the system that we desperately need, we're going to have to go after the same structures of power that are prevalent in so many industries in the United States. And so what I'm talking about is that the kind of stranglehold that we see from, this sort of gauntlet that our medical advances, our medical systems are funneled through. Gatekeepers, middlemen, subcontractors, conglomerates, monopolies, all sort of being driven by Wall Street investors and the profit motive. This is the state of healthcare in America. And it's driven at a policy level. One of the big pieces that I did to kick off our series on the business of healthcare was about this guy named Tom Scully, who was President George H.W. Bush's head of, he was his health policy guy, and then he became the head of CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services under Bush 2. And he innovated so many of the practices, the government practices that we see in healthcare today, from the privatization of the prescription drug benefit in Medicare to the privatization of Medicare through Medicare Advantage, and so many other facets of the system. And once he was done doing all that, he spun out into the private sector, where he ended up with a private equity firm known as Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe. And at Welsh Carson, he used his knowledge of the system, which only he and a few other people actually understand, to exploit it and to bring into the system companies that could use public dollars to enrich themselves rather than to treat patients. And we see this pattern of behavior repeat throughout the healthcare system. In most every state in the country, insurance markets are heavily concentrated, such that you might be confused into thinking there is a single payer system. The problem is the single payer is private. The single payer is an insurance company that maximizes its profit by denying care. We now see in about half of the country, about half of the enrollees in Medicare are privatized. They go through the Medicare Advantage system, which both overbills and underdelivers. It uses coding, special ways in which Medicare is reimbursed, or Medicare reimburses insurance companies to make their patients look sicker than they actually are, so they can reap more profit from them, and then to deny care wherever possible in order to limit the expenditures that they have. So, the insurance side of the market is rapidly concentrating, and we have a phenomenon known as concentration creep, where if you have two sides of a transaction and one side is getting more and more concentrated, the other side is going to tend to want to do so as well in order to keep up. And so we see this with hospital systems. We see this with private equities foray into whether it's outpatient care, whether it's the various physician practice groups that have been taken over by private equity firms. And then you see it, on a completely different level on the prescription drug supply chain, where you have a series of kind of power groups that are very concentrated. You have the pharmacy benefit managers, which sort of are middlemen that sit in between health plans and consumers and pharmacies. And increasingly, PBMs, these pharmacy benefit managers, are the big three of them are all owned by health plans now. Cigna owns Express Scripts. CVS, which has a pharmacy benefit manager, owns Aetna, and Optum is owned by United Health. So the health plan is supposed to hire this PBM to operate in its interest, but the health plan now owns the PBM. It increasingly owns pharmacies, and it works with drug companies to allegedly get discounts for the drugs. It's supposed to save money in the system. However, it realizes that the higher the rebate that a PBM secures from a drug company, or the higher the price, the list price of a particular drug, the higher the rebate that they can get. And so paradoxically, this system that is supposed to limit the price of prescription drugs is actually increasing it. And we're starting to see some legislative efforts and some also regulatory efforts to try to crack down on this. But the larger point here is that as long as we have these kinds of systems in place, with these privatized operators that have more of a fealty to bolster their stock price rather than serve their patients, and that they have this terrific foreknowledge into how to work the public dollars that are already being released for the purposes of healthcare, then it's hard to see how, even if you increase the public side of the system, you still have these operators that are going to attempt to profit. So, just to give you some statistics, uh, 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 the cut of national healthcare expenditures that goes towards administrative overhead and waste by some figures is as high as 30%. Um, uh, there are estimates that outright fraud comprises about $10 out of every $100 the U.S. government spends on healthcare. The actual amount of money that goes into policing the healthcare system to operate against fraud, according to the Health and Human Services Inspector General, is 2 cents for every $100. So there's a vast disproportionality between the money that we spend to try to stop fraud and the money that actually is going into it. So I think that while this attempt to move towards single payer is not just commendable, but it's what we must do. We must at the same time look at these concentrations of power in our healthcare system and work towards dismantling them. Now, fortunately, this administration has ushered in a more aggressive posture toward corporate power. In the last several months, there have been blockages of mergers in the healthcare policy space, including hospital mergers, including attempted mergers in health information technology companies, and so on. And so I think there is some level at which we have stopped the bleeding, and there are further investigations going into, for example, the stranglehold that pharmacy benefit managers have on the system. But much more needs to be done. I'll leave you with this one anecdote that comes from my book Monopolized, and thank you for mentioning it. So one story I tell in that book is about a man whose wife had cancer and needed to go in for treatments, IV treatments, for a number of years. And he went to he lived in the San Diego area, and he went to this hospital in La Jolla, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Beautiful view, a big bank of windows. And the nurse practitioner started to, instead of hooking up his wife to an IV, started to give her a manual push of the various drugs that she needed for that particular treatment. And the man said, "Well, what is going on here?" And the doctor or the nurse said, "Well, we're out of IV bags. We have no IV bags, and so we have to perform this in this fashion." IV bags are salt and water in a bag, right? And this guy is looking out over the Pacific Ocean, which is literally salt and water, and being told that they don't have salt and water in a bag, and so they're going to use this practice that was put away in the 1940s. Is when we got IV technology widespread in this country. Now, there were two reasons for this IV shortage, which we've actually seen perpetually over the past several years. One is that half of all IV bags are manufactured in Puerto Rico, and this was around the time of Hurricane Maria, which knocked out those manufacturing hubs and limited the supply of IV bags. But there was a deeper kind of reason for this shortage, and actually several drug shortages that we see in the United States. This is, we are told, a capitalist society where it is impossible to have shortages. If there is a need in the marketplace, then some enterprising a company will rush in to fulfill it and earn what they can off of that. And that is how capitalism works. But if you go to the FDA's website and look at drug shortages, you'll find that there are hundreds of drugs in shortage at any particular time. And the reason for this, as I tell in this chapter of the book, is about these another set of middlemen that are known as group purchasing organizations. There are about 4 of them that serve all hospitals in the United States. They essentially supply with bulk supplies all of the major hospitals in the US, and they are usually done through sole source contracts. And this heightens the fragility of the system. So if there is a problem in Puerto Rico with IVs, there is no means of escape for these hospitals because the GPO only sources from one particular source. And because of this, if you are a generic drug manufacturer, if you're a manufacturer of a low margin medical device like an IV bag, you're not going to want to break into this market because the only way that you can sell your stuff over to a hospital is if you hook on with one of the 4 gatekeeper GPOs, group purchasing organizations. And in fact, there are structures to lock those purchases in place. There's a thing called the 90-10 rule, where if a hospital signs on with a GPO to buy a certain amount of goods, the next year they have to buy 90% of their goods from the same place, or they lose the discounts that they got in the first place. And no hospital is likely to do that. The executives of those hospitals also often get kickbacks from the GPO to continue buying with them. And so this has created a tremendous amount of fragility in our system of particularly hospital drugs, particularly low margin generic drugs, where there simply aren't enough companies producing these life-saving important treatments, even if they are not terribly profitable anymore. And it's created a situation where major cancer drugs have been in shortage over the last several months. Really basic drugs that people get in the hospital routinely have been put into shortage. And so it's important to focus on how insurance companies are dealing in this marketplace. And certainly insurance companies trying to limit their own exposure to pay off claims while trying to maximize the amount of money they extract, whether from the government or from individuals through premiums. That's an important factor. It's an important thing to do. And I honor the work that you're doing, but there are other parts of this market that are worth paying attention to. That's kind of my main message here. And we need to look at this in a manner that tries to break those structures of power, to break, re-regulate and reorient those markets so that they serve patients rather than just serving a corporate bottom line. So I'll leave it right there, and I'm happy to take your questions. I have about 10 minutes or so to do so. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, David. That's very enlightening and challenging at the same time. So we're open for questions. While you think of your questions, I want to let David know what's happening right here in River City, Corvallis, Oregon.
Okay.
We were notified just less than a month ago that Optum, the branch of United Health, is in negotiation to purchase the Corvallis Clinic, a clinic that has been here for 75 years and treasured. And because of the pandemic, as with many clinics and hospitals, they lost income. They have not been able to pay, attract or pay staff. They're desperate, and they've, like a drowning man, have grabbed a large snake. And so we're doing what we can, and Oregon has at least an oversight program that can at least slow this down and even halt it. So we're working hard at that. They did the same thing in Eugene 3 years ago, and in Portland, probably without much public notice, but this is gaining quite a bit of public notice among legislators and others.
Well, a couple things on that. Number one, Optum, which, as you mentioned, is a division of United Health. Now, we know United Health as the biggest insurance company in the world or in the nation. It's also the largest employer of doctors in the United States. So it's become this real Leviathan. We actually have a great story, a couple stories on our website about United Health and its history going back to the 1970s, and how it became this sort of colossus that it is today. So very important to look at United Health, and you know, it's great that you're doing work to try to block that. The other thing that I would mention is that Oregon, like dozens of states in this country, has what they call corporate practice of medicine laws, which are designed to limit the ability for conglomerates to run healthcare organizations, to run hospitals, to run these kinds of things. And usually, what they do is they find a loophole where they transfer sort of nominally the assets to a health professional who is nominally the head of the particular entity, the practice, when in reality it's you know, corporate people in a big C-suite, you know, making the bottom line decisions. I'm told that there is some movement in Oregon to do you know, legislation to tighten up the language around corporate practice of medicine. This is a movement that, interestingly, has been started by ER doctors who are fed up with having to serve profit rather than patients. And I think it's a thing you should really be clued into. I'm actually appearing in a few weeks in Palm Springs at a conference put on by the American Association of Emergency Medicine about this very issue. So take a hard look at corporate practice of medicine law.
Mike, you're muted. Yep.
Thanks,
There
Cello.
are a few questions in the chat. Okay, go ahead, Mike. You want to run that?
Yeah, Cello, you're up.
Thank you very much. Consuelo Echeverria from Healthcare for All, Washington. Two questions, one very quick. Would you be interested in doing other presentations over Zoom for other organizations like Healthcare for All Washington? We have a speaker series. And secondly, if I could please ask you, I have been trying to understand pharmacy benefit managers and the inner workings of them. Could you please give me a source for really trying to, you know, do a deep dive into PBMs?
Sure. I've thrown in the chat my email, and you're welcome to contact me as far as speaking engagements. As far as PBMs, I've also put in a story that I wrote about PBMs. This was back in 2017, but the core issues are the same. PBMs are middlemen. They were initially hired because prescription drug plans had claimed they had no ability to negotiate with drug companies to lower prices, and so this middleman entity of PBM said, "Well, we can help you. We have expertise, and if you hire us, we'll take a little fee off the top, but we will lower your prescription drug prices. We promise, and we'll make sure everybody gets paid." And you know, from that sort of humble beginning, they've become really a giant part of the healthcare system. And because really the reason that PBMs have become so powerful is an information advantage they have. PBMs are the only one. There's kind of three sectors of the pharmaceutical supply chain. There's health plans who pay off through their prescription drug benefit. There are pharmacies who are reimbursed for dispensing drugs, and there are drug companies who are paid, you know, for the purchase of their product. And only PBMs know how much everybody's getting paid, right? So this makes it very easy for PBMs to skim off the top, to use practices that may raise drug prices for customers, but make it look like they're providing some value to the system through discounting. And that's sort of the broad strokes. The details, many of the details are in that story.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. We have just a few minutes. Barbara and then Michael.
Yes, I'll try and be quick. I've been following this. My hair is on fire. Matt Stoller have his thing a big.
Mhm.
I just wrote a thing on the story of USAF in Texas, and it was so
Mhm.
ironic
Mhm.
that United Health in the thing was a victim of the
Yeah.
monopoly, and they're the ones who tried to pull out and got in trouble. But I mean, I guess the Himmelstein and Wolfhander has said, well, when we get this, we can't do anything with it because there won't be any services around. But
Right.
is it really a pipe dream that in a state like Massachusetts, where if there was in fact guidance
Mhm.
from the medical trust backed by the government of this, that we could in fact allocate the resources better, at least allocate the
Yeah.
resources,
I think
or
the
is it
good
just a
news.
pipe dream?
Yeah, no, I think the good news is that we're starting to see more recognition about this. You mentioned, I know Matt very well, and he does great work. You mentioned the U.S. Anesthesia Partners lawsuit. This is the Federal Trade Commission brought this lawsuit. Uh, they're essentially what often is called a roll-up. So basically, one company, and it's actually that company, Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe, the private equity firm
Yes,
that Tom Scully worked
I
for.
I noticed that.
So Welsh Carson said,
You
you
said
know
it.
what? If we buy every single practice of anesthesia in the state of Texas, we could probably raise prices in Texas a hell of a lot. And that's what they set out to do.
And
And
did.
this case is really a landmark because the Federal Trade Commission is basically blowing the whistle on that and saying we're going to have to break up this roll up and put in place through competition the ability for people to not be gouged through the nose by anesthesia, literally at this in terms of anesthesia. So I think it's notable that this is one of the first cases where the Federal Trade Commission is looking at a private equity roll up and saying this actually violates our antitrust laws. We haven't seen that much before. And if we continue to do so, I think it will make all of these things, dealing with these concentrations of power in the healthcare provider space, if it's done correctly, it makes easier the job of the states in putting forward a single payer system because all of a sudden they're not going to be harangued by large conglomerations that are saying, okay, you're going to have to pay me this rate in order for for me to allow your insurance, your single payer insurance in my practice. So I think that these two things are complementary. They work hand in hand, working at the state level or at the federal level or whatever level to try to deal with the insurance side of the market, and then using the regulatory powers that we have and legislative powers potentially to crack down on some of these provider issues on the other side of the transaction.
Thank you. You just have a minute or two. I know, David.
Yeah.
Chuck, you have a comment? I know Michael's waiting, but you are president. You get first choice here.
David, I can write to you, but my question basically was, and it's a deeper question. It's in the chat. How did we get to the state of monopolistic capitalism we find ourselves in? And how closely does it approximate the state corporatist economic structure that Mussolini identified as a cornerstone of fascism? I mean, the larger question is, how close are we getting to that actual reality?
I mean, it's really interesting for you to bring that up because we hear about these threats to democracy through the next election, things of that nature, and really this fusing of the state and the corporation is a much older tale. In particular, we stopped paying attention to monopolies around the 1980s, early 1980s. Robert Bork put together a book called The Antitrust Paradox, where he essentially rewrote or reinterpreted the laws, the antitrust laws of the country that were put in place in the 1890s by the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act. Without actually changing a word of the statute, got the judges and got the Justice Department at that time under Reagan to really change their interpretation of the law and to adopt a laissez-faire approach to concentration. And what we've seen in the 40 years since then, that's only being turned around really now by the much more aggressive antitrust enforcers of the Biden administration. We've seen this tremendous amount of consolidation in the U.S. economy, and it is not just a harm on price. And we see this very clearly in the healthcare space. There was a New York Times article not too long ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, about the impact of private equity-owned hospitals and nursing homes on health outcomes. And it's really stark and incredible. The diminished healthcare outcomes that we see specifically from corporate ownership of healthcare providers. So this is not just price. This hurts workers. This hurts, in the case of healthcare, it hurts patients. It hurts democracy and liberty, and sort of in the ways that you've alluded to, Chuck. So we, in the last 4 or 5 years, have seen this movement, a pushback against these concentrations of corporate power. It's kind of what I reported on in my book, Monopolized. And we're starting to see those things come to fruition. I remember during the Trump administration sitting at tables with groups of people who are saying, well, what are we going to do to push back against this corporate power? And some of the people at that table now run the Federal Trade Commission. They now run the Justice Department's antitrust division. They were the administration liaison to those agencies, the antitrust czar of the administration. So we're starting to see movement against this, and we're starting to see people understand that the harms that this creates.
So, Michael, I know
I got time for one more.
Okay, good. Michael, he was waiting. Go ahead, Michael. You'll have to unmute. There you go.
Okay.
Very interesting presentation. So I have a question. So regarding to the monopoly, private equity forcing hospitals, doctors to merge together, and I understand that majority of healthcare providers are very frustrated with the system of private equity taking over, and I also understand that they don't like the system, but they're very skeptical to transition into single payer Medicare for all regarding the pay, because we know very clearly private equity is screwing up doctors, nurses, but I'll say doctors the most, because majority of doctors used to be in solo practice. So how do we inform doctors and convince them that the private equity is not the way to go? And I know like some doctors say that, yeah, private equity is bad, but we just got to go with the flow.
Yeah. I think it's actually a more hopeful story. I don't think at least a lot of doctors need much convincing about that. There is a growing movement from doctors, which is, at variance with past practice. We all remember that the American Medical Association in the 1960s were the most vigorous opponents of Medicare, that they're the ones who paid Ronald Reagan to make this recording saying, Medicare will be the death of freedom, essentially. But now, I mentioned this conference that I'm speaking at in a few weeks, that is being put on by emergency medicine doctors who understand this issue at a greater level than they previously have. There's a great doctor named Wendy Dean who has written a book, an incredible book about doctors struggling with this new corporatization of medicine. It's a really fascinating portrait, and we're seeing just a number of doctors. We're even at the American Medical Association's most recent conference, we saw a real debate go on about corporate practice of medicine laws, and whether they should be more rigorously enforced. So I think doctors are ready. We're also seeing more unionization among doctors, which is very unique in our history. Just recently in Minnesota, a health group unionized their physician staff. These are kind of, I think there's some winds of change out there as far as doctors are concerned. And I think they can be, more reliable allies with patients in this fight. They're increasingly seeing themselves on the same side as patients in this fight.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for
All right.
going beyond your time
Yeah,
limit. We
no
really
problem.
value
Thank
that.
you very much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. All right,
me-
take care.
Okay,
Thank you,
bye.
so much,
David.
David.
Thank you.
There's a link to David's book in the chat, and he also dropped a link to his emails in there, and some articles at American Prospect, of which he's editor. Mike,
You want to finish with a pitch? Chuck?
If you subscribe to the American Prospect, you also get, at least if you want, you get emails about the different articles and little blurbs, and it's very informative. It's wonderful.
thanks for that tip, Cheryl. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chuck,
Uh,
I would really like to thank you for asking that question. Because your question really gets to the crux of the matter, and Citizens Unite, I always go back to Citizens Unite, and this is a much longer conversation, but I just personally wanted to thank you for asking that question.
Okay,
well,
Chuck, it's yours to take us to the finish line.
Well, I want to see if folks have other conversation, but I will drop a chat in the chat. I will drop a link to it's an anti-fascism education site that I started up last year, and it's really designed to inform folks as to what's coming at us. I know that it's caused a lot of alarm in the past, but I think people are waking up to the reality. And I identify the three cornerstones as state corporatism, which David defined more clearly, the merger, and that's really where Mussolini started his definition, he being the founder of fascism post World War I. But there's also white supremacy and religious nationalism. And then I list out 28 other sort of ugly ideologies and practices that have been weaponized by the billionaire class. I think this all emanates from the billionaire class. It's about 3,000 billionaires around the world, about 1,000 in the US, who control our institutions, either directly or indirectly through the political class. So that to me, that's the reality that we face. And I think the more that we understand about that, the more empowered we'll be in understanding what it is that we need to do, and to not fight against each other, because that's exactly what they want us to do, divide and conquer. So I'll stop there with that. Other than to say that we're doing, for folks who missed it on the front end, we're making really dynamic steps forward with Representative Khanna's State-Based Universal Healthcare Act. It was dropped as a bill in early November. If you didn't catch that, it's HR 6270. And we're building out power with the national progressive organizations. So we're going to grow our numbers quite dramatically over the next several months as we push out this national petition. And as we build alliances with these other organizations in a way that's going to elevate the work we do and give the prospect or the chance of states like Oregon, California, Washington, Minnesota, New York, and Massachusetts and others to model robust universal healthcare system. So I think we're at a very exciting time. As much as people are alarmed about what's happening with the presidential election, it's the elephant, so-called elephant in the room. We can't ignore that. But let's see what folks have other comments or questions for the balance here. Mike, is there anything I missed other than we ask folks to contribute to our work? Because I do have expenses here in DC. I don't take a salary, but there are expenses for materials that I have to produce and use in lobbying members of Congress. That's all we're asking support for. But whatever you can do to help chip in monthly, ideally $36 a year is our asking for membership. Mike, anything I missed?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay, folks have other comments or questions? Just throw up your hand or raise the reaction button. Cheryl.
Yeah, what's does anybody know, Mike, you probably know, what is our Congresswoman's position is on this?
Val Hoyle is in our district, and she has signed on to the we call it the Sabuca Bill, State-Based Universal Healthcare Act, 6270, HR 6270. She'll need encouragement to take that position because she'll have suits entering her office frequently. In fact, all of our Congress, well, 4 out of our 6 delegation have signed on to this. The others are the Republicans, DeReamer in Portland area and Bentz in east of the Cascades. But Chuck and Warren George and others have made a little bit of headway by talking with those Republican representatives from the angle that they know they're losing their birthing centers, their rural hospitals. They're frightened, they're worried. And the other thing about the state-based approach is that this does not increase the federal debt, which is deep in the heart of these more conservative people. So that's a way you can introduce interest your conservative friends about this. States maintain more control, and it does not increase the federal debt.
Right.
And you're giving healthcare to those that are most vulnerable, our rural population, many of whom are very poor and don't have access to resources that those who live in urban areas do.
Right.
Including broadband.
What the United Healths are doing is picking the ripe fruit and ignoring the underserved areas. And so it radically increases the inequity in our system.
And just to add to that, that as I lobby members of Congress and their staff, so most of what I do are cold calls because a lot of them are not responsive to phone and email. And that's why it's important that I get engagement from folks from the district because they're obviously more prone to listen to constituents. I tailor my message. I make sure I know where they're coming from. I look at their record in terms of where they get their money, right? That's opensecrets.org, opensecrets.org. And I see where they are. Have they lined up in support of Pramila Jayapal's National Medicare for All bill? And if they haven't, I want to make sure that I listen very carefully as to what their ideas are and how are we going to get to universal health care. And I make it a very welcoming conversation and say, best ideas, bring your best ideas to the table. Well, ultimately, we need your vote to get the HR 6270 passed at the congressional level, because everybody in this room, we know that single payer is the proven pathway to creating the by far the most robust and effective universal healthcare systems. So we just need to get this legislation passed, this enabling legislation. And so I'm very, very mindful of who I'm talking with and what their thoughts are on healthcare. The other thing to say is that healthcare is a marginalized discussion. It's not being taken seriously these days in the halls of Congress, nor is wealth equity, nor is the climate change. I mean, so these are a lot of major issues that are simply marginalized, that are not being discussed, and hearings are not even being allowed to go forward on any number of topics by the Republican majority. So knowing that reality, our goal is to get this legislation to pass in the next 2 to 3 years. Hopefully we get a majority party that's willing to have those conversations and votes and allow us to move forward.
So thanks, Chuck. I see Michael's hand again, but I want Bruce Thompson to comment if he's listening. A little more personal story about Optum and what is done in Oregon already. Bruce, are you available?
Yeah, hi. everybody. My story is about Optum buying out Eugene, Oregon Medical Group, which had about 120 doctors enlisted in that medical group. It was a multi-specialty group. It primarily primary care, but all kinds of specialists. So this was in April of 22. And my son, our son, who is disabled, needed some urgent medical care. And at that time, Optum, the Eugene Medical Group, all practices in the Eugene Medical Group were not seeing patients in the afternoon, 5 days a week, for 4 months, because they were learning the Optum medical information system. That's what they were doing. So they were sending people to the emergency room who needed urgent medical care. So that's where we ended up several times throughout the next year, actually. As now 2 years later, a year and a half later, about a third of the physicians, practitioners from Eugene Medical Group have left Lane County because, of course, of restrictive covenants that they signed with Optum, had to sign with Optum. And you cannot get any information from the remaining medical providers within Optum because they all have NDAs. So that's the reality of what it looks like on the ground. I have petitioned the Oregon Health Authority to do a impact study of the Optum purchase of Eugene Medical Group. I'm not sure if that'll ever happen. I don't know if there's a mechanism for that, but we are working on gathering patients' stories from Lane County. These are the people, besides the physicians, the medical providers, that the third of medical providers that left, the patients had serious impacts because of lack of access to health care. And we don't know even if Optum is seeing Medicare, Medicaid patients because they're wanting to maximize their corporate earnings. So what initiative do they have to see Medicaid patients?
Thanks, Bruce. Michael, we have just about a minute to finish up. Michael, you have another brief question?
Yes, I do have a brief. Yeah, it's just a very brief question. Regarding the Democratic Congress, and I know the one-payer state is very very passionate about universal healthcare at the state level, and of course, getting it done and eventually getting it passed at national level. I know that some members of Congress are only willing to go halfway for Medicare for all. What is your organization's response to the Democrats only going halfway? But I know that your organization wants to go all the way 100%.
Chuck, you want to answer that? You're muted.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that question, Michael. When you say the Democrats only want to go halfway, are you talking about the public option?
Right, public option, because we know some members of Democrats are going to always say, "Oh,
Right.
we can't do Medicare for all because our constituents are pretty much satisfied with our health insurance. We don't want to upset the insurance companies, some doctors, and the status quo." Like, are you willing to negotiate with the Democrats, or do you think the Democrats should negotiate with the one-payer state, going all the way for Medicare for all, or state level based?
Right. So when Permilla's bill was introduced last May, 112 members of the U.S. House signed on, and we're still at 112. It's difficult to go north of that at this point, given the array of money in the industry in our politics. That's just the reality. And I'm working very closely with Permilla's office. They've got amazing staff. And our goal is to get to national single payer. I mean, understand that we're learning from our history of the US as well as the Canadian history, as well as our constitutional structure and the political realities of what's happening in DC. I mean, I've worked for 4 US senators in the past and a US House member, so I know a little bit about the way that things work. And getting prioritized discussion on this is a challenge. You know what's been going on. I mean, between Gaza and the leadership fights and the budget and this election, this is an issue of ours that's not really top shelf. But know that we believe that we can get to Medicare for all through the states. That's our theory of change. We also support 100%, the bills that are out there by Pramila and Bernie, for sure. And we're in the process of getting a senator to run a companion bill to Ro Khanna's bill over in the Senate, where we might have a chance of getting hearings and maybe votes this year. So it's an easier lift, quite frankly, to get members of Congress to support more indirectly, if you will, what the states are doing. That's just the political reality that we're looking at. And I don't try to sugarcoat that or run away from that. So I hope that's answering your question. The Democrats are afraid because of the money they take, especially the leadership, especially those who are now ranking members of committees, but also when they become chairs of committees, they really are afraid to take on or bite the hand that feeds them. That's just the reality of our politics today. I think David made reference to that in his presentation as well. Michael, does that answer your question?
It sort of answered my questions, but I think the question I was trying to the question I was trying to ask is this. Because what if the Democrats in Congress don't want to issue a waiver to the state to allow states to experiment with universal healthcare? Are you guys, as your organizers, going to take this to the Supreme Court or to the Justice for a counter lawsuit in case?
Take a peek at HR 6270. The design of that bill is for Congress to give really the authority to a negotiation between the states and Health and Human Services. So the process of going forward does not bring Congress back in to voting. What Congress does in passing the HR 6270 is it gives the tools for negotiation for states that have adopted or passed universal health care bills. Then they present those bills to the Health and Human Services Secretary, who then sets up a body to then begin the process of determining whether these universal healthcare models or legislative goals are realistic and whether they're in fact worthy of getting the waivers. And then so that's the way that the process works. So that the idea here is for the states to then model universal healthcare systems and demonstrate to the nation, much as Saskatchewan did for Canada, just how vibrant and vital it is to marginalize the insurance companies and to bring bulk purchasing for pharmaceuticals and medical equipment, and to reverse the monopolization of our medical providers through these massive hospital systems. So that's, I hope that's explaining it. But Congress, all they need to do is just give us the tools at the state level to go forward. Is that?
Well,
And then,
before you ask for more, we need to end, and Charlotte has her hand up.
Yeah,
real quickly.
Yeah.
Given what you've described in Congress right now, where the
Right.
bill hasn't been introduced in the Senate, is it
Right.
worth our while communicating with our senators saying, when this is proposed, please support it? Do you encourage that, or should we wait until it's closer to being a vote in the Senate?
Yeah, well, first we need to find a leader in the Senate, somebody who's going to run a companion bill, the same legislation, right, in the upper chamber. And that's when we'll begin the direct lobbying. But if you're in conversation with your U.S. senator, if you want to reach out to your U.S. senator, say, please help us find a sponsor for a companion bill to Representative Khanna's HR 6270. We don't want to throw names out there, but we have identified about 6 senators who are possibilities or at this point, people who are on the national single payer bill. So they're going to be sympathetic to begin with. And so that's the discussion that's happening right now, sort of back channel, if you will. We don't like, it's important not to be public with people's names because while you're, trying to recruit them or negotiate
Right.
with them. But that's the idea, and that's the process we're working on. So we're working on parallel tracks here. We want to build out in the House. We want to get Republicans on. We want to continue getting more conservative Democrats. We got Adam Schiff, who's a corporate Democrat, has signed on with this bill. We got Dean Phillips of Minnesota, who's running for president. He signed on last session and this session. So that's the kind of movement that we're able to get by pitching this legislation as this is everybody has a seat at the table. Bring your best ideas. We want to get to universal health care. If you have other ideas, fine. Just vote for this bill. And again, we're confident. We know that our legislative approach at the state level is by far the best way to go forward, and will certainly be the most successful, as was proven in Saskatchewan and other countries around the world.
I
Thank you.
agree. Let's keep nudging Merkley and Wyden at our town halls. They are bending a little bit. Wyden is not so quick to discount the idea. So yeah, let's keep nudging them. Well, I think we're 7 minutes beyond the hour. Any other comments, Chuck? I would just say, keep in mind, for me anyway, this is the mantra that runs through my mind is like Nelson Mandela said, all things are impossible until they're done. And so for me, I make a distinction between what I call radical hope and optimism. I adopt this notion of radical hope, which means going all in. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It doesn't even necessarily mean that I think it's going to happen. But if we don't think in terms of hope and engagement and hospitality and listening and very deliberate, intentional connection with organizations, we're doing a disabilities conference coming up on March 23rd. If you might want to just make a note of that, we're building power with the disability rights and justice community. That's a massive community. We're building power with veterans. We're building power with the business community, and labor, of course, as well. But we have to go beyond sort of the traditional coalition building model if we're going to succeed. And that's the kind of work that we're doing at the organizational level. And it's all about inside-outside strategy. I think ultimately we're going to need to get to a point where we mobilize 7-8% of the national population. And we'll be prepared to do whatever steps frankly, short of violence that are necessary to take the system back. I think that's what's going to we have to scare our politicians. We have to convince them through ultimately through more direct action, that it's not enough to pay lip service, in our direction and say, well, we can't do it, or maybe sometime down the line, or no, you can't kick the can. People's lives are being lost here. People are going deep into bankruptcy. Communities are losing their healthcare centers, as we're seeing here in Corvallis and other places. This is urgent. We need to bring urgency to this, and that's the kind of work that I'm doing in a way. I arrive at the door of these members of Congress, and I might be talking to an intern, a receptionist, the scheduler, the chief of staff. I sometimes run into members, and I'm ready to have that 30-second opening conversation and say, we need you to get on board with this bill. Let's have a longer conversation, understand what it really means for your constituents, for your state, and for our nation. We need to lift everyone up together. So we do have a strategy for winning here, and it begins with a sort of what I call a radical visualization of the society that we want and need, and that's what we strive toward. Thank you so much, Michael, and thanks everybody for coming in on a chilly, for most of us, a chilly January Friday, and keep up the fight. Keep an eye out. The petition will be dropping on February 12th. We're really proud of the work that we're doing over there. It's a lot of work, but it's really worthwhile, and it's going to pay off. And whatever you can contribute to our efforts is going to make a world of difference. So thanks, everybody. Keep it up.